Step into the Gardener's Lodge with me, Mykal. Let's explore the fascinating world of gardening, nature and ecology through conversations with experts, thought leaders, passionate enthusiasts and of course, some real good friends. All from the cosy heart of the lodge. Come on in. The Gardener's Lodge podcast is created on the traditional lands of the Darug and Gundungurra people in the Blue Mountains. We pay respect to all First Nations elders, past and present. G'day and welcome to the show. Now, it is no secret that I am absolutely obsessed with indoor plants. I love the way they make me feel. I love the routine they give me of caring for them. I love watching them grow. I love watching them bloom. I love almost everything. No, not almost everything. I love everything about indoor plants. But I know that's not the case for everyone. A lot of people struggle. But I don't think it has to be that way. Today I'm talking with Cass from Plant with Cass. She is a terrarium expert. She runs workshops helping people build tropical closed-lid terrariums. They're so low maintenance, as we're about to find out, that literally anyone could keep these guys alive. I'm so excited to share this episode with you. I've known Cass for a number of years and I've been enamored with her work, her artistry, as it would be. I think you will be too. Make sure you check her out and have a look at the work that she produces and the terrariums that she builds. They're absolutely stunning. But before we get into the main chat, of course, it is time for our 6 rapid fire questions so that you can get to know Cass just that little bit better. Are you ready, Cass?
Sounds good. Gosh, I'm nervous. Okay, yep.
Everyone gets very nervous at this point. Okay, favourite plant?
My favourite plant would have to be the Monstera.
Favourite way to connect with nature?
My favourite way to connect with nature would have to be going on hikes and bushwalks.
What is the most beautiful garden or natural landscape that you have visited?
Oh gosh, that's a tough one. Anywhere in the Blue Mountains. Although, actually, in saying that, I have hiked through parts of Darwin and Kakadu, and I have to say
Yes.
that is very amazing when it comes to nature.
Favourite garden tool?
I don't know if it's a favorite garden tool, but I do use it in the garden. Is those kneeling mats.
If you could be one, what would it be? A plant or an animal?
Oh, I would have to say, an animal. I do love my animals.
Perfect.
Yep.
So when you're looking to research anything garden related, where do you go for the most sound and reliable information?
Oh, I guess I start at a Google search, really. YouTube, even as well.
Where did you actually find your passion for plants and gardening?
You could say my love of plants started when I was quite young, and I was always in the garden with my dad. I think there's even a photo that my mum pulled out just a couple of months ago, and I'm there, like, literally watering the garden, and I would have been maybe about age 4. So yeah,
Cute.
it definitely stemmed from a very young age. And then I guess, as I got older, I got married, had my own home. I had, lots of different plants in the house. I loved indoor plants. My dad was more of an outdoor, veggie gardener,
Yep.
whereas I like veggies and I do have my own small veggie garden, but my primary enjoyment is indoor plants and tropical plants. So probably about going on more than 5 years ago now is where I found out about tropical terrariums. And it was actually online. And funny enough, it was a guy from the UK where I found out about tropical terrariums. And I was like, wow, this is actually really interesting, basically being able to grow plants inside a glass jar. And, with minimal care, minimal maintenance. And I was like, wow, this is fascinating because, you know, I used to post on just my personal Instagram about plants and my gardening. People used to call me the crazy plant lady. And they used to ask me questions about plants. And, and they're like, oh, you're so helpful. You're so knowledgeable. And yeah. And then, basically, a lot of people would say to me, and I used to have conversations with so many people about how hard it is to take care of plants. They don't have time, they overwater, and lots of other things. And so many people say the same thing, even now, that they can't take care of plants and they kill them all. I guess that's what fascinated me when I found out about tropical terrariums all those years ago, because, it's basically a mini ecosystem, more so obviously the closed lid terrariums. Mini ecosystem takes care of itself. You spray it a couple of times a year and that's it. And you leave it alone pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
So
that's so fascinating.
yeah, that it is fascinating. We're gonna actually dive so deep into how to build them, how to care for them, the maintenance that they need, and everything like that. But do you remember the first terrarium that you ever made?
I do. Yes, it was when I first found out about it about 5 years or so ago, and I was following this guy on Instagram, and then also I started researching about them as well. And I can tell you now, when I first started creating terrariums, 5 plus years ago, they look very different to what I create today. I guess back then I was learning about tropical terrariums, testing, trying to actually work out how tropical terrariums, closed lid terrariums more so work, and how the ecosystems work. So I
Well, you've
guess,
certainly
yeah.
developed your skills now because the ones that you create now are just beautiful. They're little pieces of artwork from the layers in the soil to the plant selection. They're stunning.
Yeah, thank you, thank you, and I do really enjoy it. It is, a big passion of mine now, but not to say that I don't love indoor plants. I've got about 80 indoor plants, just indoors, and then I've got all my patio plants. So that's on top of my 80 indoor plants.
Good on you. I counted
Yeah.
mine recently and I'm about the same as you at the moment. And I've still got a couple
Yes.
of your terrariums in my house, actually,
Oh, oh,
that I
bless.
lovingly tend to. Although one of them I did put in front of too close to a window and the moss in it did kind of not like that. But anyway,
Yeah, fair enough. As long as the plant's still alive.
yeah, exactly. It is. It is. I probably need to tend to them and give them a little trim back. So let's rewind and go right back to basics. What
Yeah.
is a terrarium?
So I guess the way I like to explain what a terrarium is a mini ecosystem, something that takes care of itself. It basically mimics nature, just in a very small form. That's
Lovely.
probably the simplest way that I explain what
Yeah.
a closed lid terrarium is.
Closed lid, which is your area of expertise.
That's
So
right.
let's talk about the actual craft of building a terrarium. Starting from the start, we're going to do closed lid terrariums. How do you choose the right container or glass jar?
I guess what I look for is glass clarity.
Okay.
Making sure the glass is actually nice and, as clear as possible. You don't want anything frosted or anything that magnifies anything inside the terrarium, or just doesn't make it look nice and clear.
Yep.
So I look for glass that has some, clarity to it.
Does size matter?
No, you can make a terrarium out of anything. I've made a terrarium out of a necklace at one
Wow.
stage, and yeah, so and I still sell those. But yeah, so you basically, it's a little vial necklace, and it basically has live moss inside. So you can make them out of anything, any size.
Cool.
It doesn't matter. Yeah, as long as it has a lid. And that's another thing that's quite important, is the type of lid. So with a closed lid terrarium, you don't want to be using timber too much. What I found over the years with testing is that with timber on the inside, because timber doesn't like moisture so much, it actually can mold. So mold
Okay.
can form, and bad mold spores can form on the actual inside of the lid. And then those mold spores can then sort of get into your terrarium and sort of wreak havoc. So you don't want anything with a timber lid. I mean, look, there are terrariums out there and they use timber lids. And depending on how sort of the timber is lacquered and treated, you can. But I tend to steer away with anything with a timber lid. So I usually go for more something mainly glass lids,
Yep.
or you can use perspex lids, and cork lids work well. They are a bit porous, so moisture tends to escape a little bit faster in a terrarium with a cork lid over something with like a glass lid.
That's what I was going to say. So does the seal matter? Like, does it need to be completely airtight? I suppose not if you're using a cork.
No, no. So it doesn't need to be completely airtight, but you'd want it to be 95% airtight.
Yeah.
Some of my terrariums do have like a rubber seal. Um, on the lids have a rubber seal, and obviously anything with a rubber seal that closes really, really tightly, there's really not any air that's going to get in there. Which there's pros and cons to that as well. Obviously, the tighter the lid, the more contained everything is, and the more moisture and humidity that is created inside the glass jar.
Hey, if you like native plants as much as I do, I have a special treat for you. I've created a free Australian native garden design or planting palette. What it is a collection of beautiful Australian native plants that are very adaptable to all different climates within Australia. So if you're stuck with what to plant in your native garden, download your free Australian native garden design. The free download also comes with a bunch of extra information on the steps you'll need to make it flourish. If that sounds like something that you'd like to take advantage of, the link to the free download is in the show notes below this episode. Check it out. Can you walk me through the process step by step from, obviously now we've got our jar, all the
Yep.
way up
Yep.
to planting?
Firstly, you want some type of drainage layer. Obviously the drainage layer is really important because there is no holes in the glass jar. So you want to create that drainage layer. So that's where we use something like rocks or pebbles. Then you sort of go on to a mesh layer, and that is basically just to separate the rocks and sort of everything else that we're going to put in.
Is that like a
So your
piece of
charcoal in the
fly
soil.
screen or something?
Yeah, there's a couple of ways that you can actually create a meshing layer. So you can use like a fly screen with really small holes, or you can use sphagnum moss.
Okay.
So yeah, so sphagnum moss is basically dried moss, and you can get it in bags, from your local nurseries, and what there's a certain way that you need to use that as well. You can't sort of just put it in dry. And then I guess then from there, from that meshing layer, then you go on to charcoal. Now, obviously, you need to use horticultural charcoal. You can't
Mm-hmm.
use barbecue charcoal. People have
Yeah.
asked me in my workshops, can I use barbecue charcoal? And I said, no, you cannot.
Good to know. Good to know.
Yeah, I guess the way that horticultural charcoal and barbecue charcoal, they're treated very differently.
Okay.
So yeah, so you need to make sure it's horticultural charcoal, and then from that, then you want a good soil, like a good terrarium soil. You can use your general indoor potting mix if you're just sort of an everyday gardener that wants to make a terrarium.
Yep.
However, I sort of tend to steer people away from just already made indoor potting mix. I actually make up my own terrarium soil.
Okay.
Yeah, and
What's that
that
made up of?
so that's made up of a few different components and a few different ratios. So I use Japanese volcanic rock, which is called akadama.
Mm-hmm.
I use pumice stone. I also use coconut coir, which is basically the coconut husk. You can
Beautiful.
buy dried. I also use worm castings to give it a bit of
Nice.
nutrients through the soil. And there's a certain ratio that you need to use to mix up that terrarium soil and make it nice and airy. So you want basically a soil that doesn't clump together, and it's nice and airy, and
Free
works well
draining.
with the plants. Yeah, free draining, and that sort of thing. And then I guess from there then comes to your plants and your planting. And there's specific plants that I like to use that are more hardier than others in a terrarium. And then obviously then everyone's fun part is always in my workshops is always the decorative stage. Everyone loves the decorative stage.
Of
So
course. Of
yeah.
course. Although even itself, the layering of the different stones, substrate, all of that is actually quite beautiful. Like I see that you kind of end up with a lot of the layers itself are like part of the artwork, really.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, and sometimes as well, what I do is between sort of the layers, at a certain point, I'll also put different color sand as well, just to give sort of a bit of a different element and sort of that wow factor.
Yeah.
More aesthetic, I guess, more so. But yeah, no, that layering, it really makes the terrarium rather than sort of just chucking everything in.
A heap of soil. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's specialist tools that are needed to build this because you're working in tight spaces. How do you go about getting everything in so perfectly?
Well, I like to use basically containers with a large opening. So
Hmm.
it's easy to get your hands in to actually make the terrarium. Obviously, you do use tools as well. That does make it easier. You know, and once you start getting into more narrow bottles, I do also make terrariums out of recycled Scotch whiskey bottles, vodka bottles,
Cool.
and yeah, and but that's where that's where it gets really tricky because the opening is so small. You've got to use makeshift tools sometimes and sticks and things like that, so you can actually get everything into the bottle, and it's so precise. And so yeah, it's definitely easier working with like a larger opening
That would
of a terrarium.
frustrate me so much.
Oh, don't worry. There's been a few times where I've sworn at the bottle, and I'm like, "You need to work. You really do."
Oh,
Oh,
that's amazing.
oh,
So only because I have a bit of background knowledge from you on this,
yeah,
do you still add springtails to your terrariums?
I do. Yes, so I
You do.
do still add springtails.
So what are springtails and why do you pop them in?
Basically, springtails are, as I like to explain it, these really little tiny bugs that they're whitish in color, and they're sort of the size of, I guess, ants, closer to ants, you could say. Basically, they're bioactive bugs. So what they do is they help keep the terrarium nice and healthy and clean, and they're basically like a janitor for your terrarium. So what they do is they feed off any sort of mold or mold spores growing inside, to a certain degree, obviously, unless you have massive breakout of mold, then there's only so much they can control it,
Mm.
depending on how many of them are in there. And basically, if you've got any decaying leaves, they'll sort of munch away at the decaying leaves, and basically their role is to keep the environment and the ecosystem healthy and thriving. And they're magnificent little like creatures. And I guess the way that they breed, because lots of people ask, how do you breed them? Because I actually breed the springtails myself. And
Oh,
basically, yeah. So quite a few years ago, I bought a small culture, and that was the first culture I bought, and I breed them ever since. And they're so easy to breed. Basically, they love the dark. So I have them in containers with, a good layer of charcoal, horticultural charcoal,
okay.
and basically it has to be moist inside your container. And then obviously I put the springtail cultures in there, and then what happens from there is they breed, and the way that they breed is you actually need to create mold inside that container. And the reason I say that is because what happens is once they see that there's too much mold and there's not enough of them, they start breeding.
Oh,
And that's sort of their thought process. I guess the easiest way to explain it is, they're sort of like, oh, there's not enough of us, and there's too much mold, and we need to keep this clean. This is not clean, so they start breeding. And in the reverse, if there's too much of them and not enough food or moisture, some of them will actually start dying off, and those that are alive will eat the ones that have died, so it keeps their species, I guess, in existence.
wow. So they're
Yeah.
kind of managing the ecosystem within inside the terrarium, but also managing their own populations.
Yes, yeah, that's correct.
Fascinating.
Yeah, but they do like the dark, so I do breed them in closed containers, like really well sealed closed containers, basically inside a very dark cupboard.
Okay, that's super interesting. I didn't realize that you
Yeah.
actually bred them yourself, but that's
Yeah.
amazing. So I guess like if we're talking about the terrarium as an ecosystem, they're like the animals, that in nature would be scratching up the surface of the soil, decaying the matter. They're kind of the living aspect to the little world that you've created.
Yeah, that's exactly
Cool.
right. Yeah, and you do find them, if you are in the garden a lot, you may sort of actually come across them while you're gardening. You're
Hmm.
planting veggies and things like that. So you may find them, but they'd be buried because
Yeah.
they do prefer the dark. So,
They're soil dwelling, so.
yes, yes.
Okay, perfect. So then that brings us up to our plant layer. What kind of plants are ideal for the terrarium environment?
In terms of the best plants to use for a terrarium, you want tropical plants. This is a closed lid terrarium, so you need plants that love, high humidity and, moderate to high moisture. So you can't be using succulents. Succulents don't work in a closed lid terrarium because succulents, like to live more on the drier side.
Yeah.
So, in terms of the plants that I generally use in most of my terrariums, the main three is Phoetonias. Phoetonias has to be my top plant that I use in a tropical terrarium.
Okay.
They're really hardy. They come in lots of different great colors. They're just, yeah. I basically have them in every single terrarium that I make. They give a nice dimension element as well, and they are more on the slower growing side, which is good as well. And then when they do sort of outgrow the terrarium, they're easy just to trim back. And you can actually propagate Phoetonias just from cuttings alone by basically cutting it and popping it back into your soil, and they'll just reroot and they'll grow again. So
Does that mean
they're
you actually grow most of the plants on yourself?
No, Photonias I do. That is the one plant that I do propagate and try and grow myself to a certain extent
Yep.
because, the sort of the amount of workshops that I run, terrariums that I make, I don't have, I guess, the space
Yeah, I
where I
suppose you can't
live.
keep up.
Yeah, yeah, I can't keep up. So I do propagate a lot of the Phoetonias, but I also do, buy most of my plants, especially when I've got sort of a lot going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, so some of the other plants that I do like to use in terrariums is Syngoniums. Again, they're really hardy in a terrarium, just probably as hardy as the Phoetonias. You can use things like ferns. There are certain varieties of ferns that I use over others just because they're more hardy. So I tend
Mhm.
to use things like the button fern. The button fern is really hardy in a terrarium. Um, I do like the parlor palm. The parlor palms are nice. They do grow tall,
Okay.
so you do need sort of more of a terrarium that is quite elongated and tall to give it
Yeah.
some space. Yeah, so I do like to use those, and there's lots of other sort of different plants that I use. They're sort of more of the main plants that I use.
So before you were mentioning actually about your workshops that you run, which leads me to my next question. What is the biggest issues that arise when creating terrariums for a newbie?
I guess I've had quite a few participants come through my workshops where they have actually attempted and tried to make their own terrarium at home, and they said they've always failed, and the terrarium has always died on them, and they haven't really understood what they've done wrong. So they've come to one of my workshops, and then basically, through the workshop and at the end of the workshop, they have said that. My workshops are just so informative, and they realize now where they went wrong when they tried to make a terrarium at home on their
Yeah.
own.
I made a terrarium years ago. This would have been probably 15 years, a decade ago.
Oh, wow.
And it went okay, but I just, dumped soil in the bottom of a jar and then chucked some plants in. And yeah, I can see there's a big difference between what I did and what you do.
Yeah, yeah. There's a little bit of I guess, a science and an art behind it. So,
Yeah, that's it. And I guess like in my case, my issue was the soil. As with all gardening, getting the soil and your substrate right is like the beginning, is the start of it all. So I think
yes.
I would imagine most people aren't layering and putting all the different substrates in that you do to get that like perfect ecosystem rolling in there.
Yeah, no, and that's where I guess they go wrong.
Let's move into maintenance. So
Yep.
we've built our beautiful terrarium. I go home, I put it on the shelf. Where should I put it?
So I guess the best place to put a closed lid tropical terrarium is out of direct sunlight and not
Ah,
outdoors. Yeah. So the problem is these plants are wanting bright but indirect light. So if you put it on a windowsill that gets really hot, especially in the summertime, or if you put it somewhere where it gets direct sunlight, what actually happens is the direct sunlight heats up the glass and it just acts as like a furnace inside that jar, and
mm.
it gets too hot, and because the lid is closed, there's nowhere for the heat to escape. So it basically just ends up being a furnace inside, and then everything just starts dying because it's too hot.
Oh,
So
okay.
yeah, so you really want to make sure you put it a little bit away from the window. You don't want it right up against the window, because again, if you put it right up against the window, the heat from the actual window then ricochets onto the glass, and just yeah, you're
And
just
probably
creating
magnifies the two different bits of glass and then fries
exactly.
the little specimens inside. Oh.
Yeah, yeah, pretty much. Yeah. So really away from a window, just, a few meters away, not on a windowsill. Bright light. You can also put them in sort of a medium lit area. Try not to put them in sort of a low light setting. Most of the tropical plants, you generally want sort of your medium to bright light. And especially if you do have moss inside your terrarium as well, you want sort of at least medium light.
Nice. So, do I open my terrarium to give it water?
You do, yes.
Okay.
So the way I like to explain, how, people ask me, how do I know when to water it? The easiest way to explain it is when you don't see nice, big droplets, on the glass, and if the glass is looking, almost dry or completely dry, and the if you've got moss in there and you open the lid and the moss is dry, then basically everything is drying up too much. So that's when you would sort of spray it with a few sprays of water. Obviously, depending on how big the jar is, will depend on how many sprays of water you give it. And you don't pour water in. So a lot of mistakes that people make is they just pour a little bit of water in like you would with a pot plant, but that's not how a
Okay.
terrarium works. There's nowhere for the water to escape, and if you overwater it, the water's going nowhere.
Yeah, it's not like you can tip
So
it upside down and just pour it back out.
yeah, no, that's not gonna work. So yes, so I always steer people away from pouring water into a terrarium. All you need to do is you just need to spray it with water.
How often would that be? Because I suppose the idea of a terrarium is that it's got a moisture in there. The light from outside of it is kind of creating condensation, almost mimicking a cloud like evaporation up out of
Yep,
the
yep,
soil.
yep, yep.
It clings to the sides and then runs down and then refeeds it. So it's kind of like a cyclical little ecosystem of its own in there, right?
Yes, that's right.
So I imagine you don't have to do it that often.
No, no. So I guess there's a few factors. It depends on how small or big the jar is. Will depend on how often you water it. Obviously, the bigger the jar and the more different types of plants that are in there, the more those plants are sort of creating the oxygen and carbon dioxide and sort of feeding off each other.
Yeah.
So you tend to need to water a little bit less if you've got a bigger tray with multiple plants. And it depends on the type of lid that you have as well. Obviously, a cork lid, the moisture tends to evaporate a little bit quicker compared to sort of a glass lid or a really well sealed container. So sort of something with a well sealed, glass lid container, you're looking at around sort of the 4 to 6 month mark, sometimes a little bit
Oh.
longer, depending on how well established your terrarium actually is. I
Oh, so
mean,
these are
I've got
really low maintenance.
yeah, yeah, they are super low maintenance. Some of the little terrariums that I make that have cork lids, looking with them about 2 to 3 months. So,
Okay.
even with a really small one, you're looking at sort of, a couple of months at a time before you need to water. You can go on holidays for, if you've got a medium to big size terrarium, you can water it before you go, make sure it's got enough moisture, and go on holidays 4 months, come back, and, that's still alive and your house plants are dead. So,
Yes. Oh, goodness.
um,
So we spoke about, I guess, mold issues and using the springtails to kind of combat those. What other issues happen within the terrarium that you think you might need to actually intervene with?
there's not too much really. The main issue is really the mold. And I guess sort of delving in a little bit into sort of the mold side of things, I do suggest that ideally you are sort of opening your terrarium at least, you know, especially in the beginning stages of when it was made, at least sort of once a month or once every 2 months, just to air it out for about 10, max 15 minutes. I wouldn't sort of air it out any longer than that. You don't want to sort of ruin the ecosystem that is already trying to be created inside your glass jar, but also as well you want to give it sort of some fresh air because it's so sealed, especially the glass lid ones. They're just so sealed that, there's no air getting in. So you want to sort of just give it a little bit of airflow, but you don't need to do that too often. As I said, as a terrarium starts settling in, the ecosystem starts working. Yeah,
Hmm.
you need to do that less and
Do you need to
less. So
clean the interior of the glass?
yeah, you will from time to time. So, it may get a little bit, dirty, as the ecosystem starts working. Generally, that's sort of, at the 1 year mark, one and a half year mark, that you might need to, clean the inside of the glass. Obviously, the outside, as it gets dusty, but also as well, the plants will flourish in there. So at sort of the 1 year mark, 1.5 year mark, it may need a little bit of a trim. Now, there's been quite a few people that have said to me, "Oh, like, the plants are hitting the lid, and it's so, you know." Basically so encapsulated with all the plants, and it doesn't look like there's any space for the plants to grow. They're like, "Oh, so do I just take the lid off now and just leave the lid off?" And that is the worst thing you could ever do, because the plants will just start dying because you've just given it a whole different environment and shocked it.
Mm.
So what you need to do is you need to take the lid off, trim the plants back a little bit, then,
Okay.
at that point clean it out, if give it a little bit of, sprays of water, some from fresh water, and then pop the lid back on, and it'll just keep thriving. And I guess one thing that I do like to tell people when it comes to, the type of water that they should be using, in a
Oh.
terrarium, is not straight tap water. So I'm pretty adamant on that. Straight tap water, if you just fill up, your spray bottle and just start spraying your terrarium, I always say it's a no go, because, in our tap water here in Australia, there's just so much, chlorine and other things that they put into the water. And, obviously, you got old pipes and things like that, it's
Mm.
not filtered water. So straight tap water for even your indoor plants is not ideal. um you want to use either, filtered or demineralized water. I always use demineralized water in all of my terrariums and in my workshops, but you can use filtered water, or if you don't have any other choice and, you want to use tap water, I always say to basically, get an old Coke, lemonade bottle, whatever, and fill that with tap water. Leave it sitting for at minimum 24 hours, even longer. Even if you fill the bottle of water up, chuck it under your kitchen sink or your laundry sink and just have it sitting there for when you're ready to even just water your, indoor plants. You want to let, the chlorine evaporate and really settle, and all of those sort of sediments to settle before you just start using tap water on, your terrariums and indoor plants.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
Good to know. Good to know. What about feeding? Do you have to add your worm castings in again after that 1 year point or anything like that?
Not usually.
Okay.
Yeah, you don't need to really add any other nutrients in. It's like any other sort of, forest or environment. And, if you've got springtails in there, it's sort of you could, add, some springtails, extra springtails in, at a year and a half in. But basically, you don't need to add any sort of fertilizers and things like that
I guess because they're
into the
breaking
terrariums.
down that kind of organic matter that's, feeding the soil again.
That's it. Yeah, that's exactly right. So, yeah, that's really not needed or necessary.
Are there any other pitfalls that people fall into with caring for their terrariums?
The watering, over watering. People think that they need to water their terrarium like their indoor plants, once a week or once every couple of weeks. That's not the case. You'll just put too much moisture in there. There's nowhere for their moisture to escape, and everything will just start rotting away.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so
God,
that's
these
probably the
terrariums are
main
going to
one.
put me out of a job here.
It's a little bit like that. No, no.
Yeah.
Yeah, all plants have their place in the world. So,
That's right. That's right. So obviously we were just chatting about your workshops. You run a business called Plant with Cass, you being
yes,
Cass,
that's me. Yep.
where you run workshops and you build terrariums for just for retail sale. You're in a number of houseplant shops. But give me your rose and your thorn for running Plant with Cass.
I guess the best thing about running my business is the people that I've met along the way. Whether they're other small businesses, or people that have come to my workshops, people that have bought terrariums from me. I've had people message me a year from attending one of my workshops, sending pictures saying, "This is the only plant that I haven't killed, and it's all thanks to you." For teaching me about tropical terrariums and closed
So
lid
good.
terrariums. Yeah, yeah. So it's just, yeah, and the people that come through my workshops, even once they finish, before they leave, they're just so thankful, and they've had the best time, and and they want to come back again, to make either different terrariums, or just even make the same one for a gift for someone else. So yeah, it really is the people that I meet, and really, teaching people about plants and tropical terrariums, which is what I love. I really love plants and nature. So yeah, so that, I guess, is what I love
Is
most
the
about my
rose?
business.
Now what about the thorn?
So probably the thorn is, with any small business, it comes with a lot of challenges. You've got challenges where people see your idea, and they decide, oh, I love that idea that she's doing. Let me just copy it.
Yeah.
And I've had people copying my idea and elements of my ideas, that I run at my workshops. You've got, I guess, the stress of the economy, and
Yeah.
people not being able to afford, to come to my workshop. They'd love to do it, but they just can't afford it. And
Well, it is a bit of a
and I,
luxury, isn't it?
well, yeah, it is for most people, but I don't like to see it as a luxury. I guess I like to see it
Mhm.
as something that you can put in your home. You really need. I feel you really need plants and nature around you to brighten your day and brighten your space.
I agree.
So yeah, yeah, but yeah, and I guess, yeah, it does come with its ups and downs. Social media is like the bane of my existence.
Amen.
And marketing, and because I'm not a marketer. I never have
Mm.
been. Obviously, I've worked in many other fields before my business, when it sort of comes to HR and training, I guess, which is why I love teaching,
Mhm.
about terrariums. But yeah, but it does come with its ups and downs, and especially in the seasons as well. So winter gets a lot quieter for me, and then once spring hits, everyone's like, "Oh, it's spring, it's warm. I'm coming out of hibernation. Let's go."
That's it. When I this how we actually got to know each other was I used to run a houseplant business, a shop called
Yes,
Bring the
yes,
Jungle, which no longer exists. But I would find the exact same thing. It would be spring, summer, autumn, woo, 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 yay, plants. And then for whatever reason, the cold months come and it's like people just forget and like they
yeah.
want nothing to do with it. It's a really kind of interesting psychological aspect to, I guess, the gardening game, I think, is that seasonality in people's mindsets.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's because, it gets quite cold and people themselves want to hibernate, like
Yeah.
plants want to
Yeah,
sleep in winter.
exactly.
You don't want to get out of bed. You're like, oh, it's too cold. I can't live today. Like, I can't get out of bed today. I can't do this.
Oh, so funny.
Mm.
So what's next? What are the big goals for Plant with Cass and for yourself?
Yeah, so I guess I always like to dream big, maybe a little bit too big, but I
Same. I think that's what we have in common.
yeah, yeah. I guess I'm really trying to grow my business now. I would want to run more corporate workshops.
Mm,
Lots of team building. I do that already, and it's just great. The teams actually love it. The corporations and companies love um, you know running the workshops for them and their team. So really, expanding on that, expanding more on my workshops. I would love to sort of speak and talk at you know gardening expos, and so on. And as a little girl, I've always dreamed about, oh, I want to be on TV. And
yeah.
that's that's probably a dream that may never come, but look, you never know. I've been on podcasts, I've been on radio, and I've done sort of a few other live interviews, so you never know what could come your
You
way. But
never know.
yeah,
If anyone
yeah.
can do it, you can do it. Trust me. So where can people find you and get in touch?
Yeah, so you can find myself, Plant with Cass. I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook. I have my own website as well where you can book into workshops, you can book private workshops, corporate workshops, and that's just at www.plantwithcass.com. Obviously, I reside in Sydney, so I do most of my workshops and travel sort of around the Sydney region. I can
Yep.
also travel up to sort of the Central Coast, Wollongong, and the Blue Mountains as well. And I do also have one stockist up at the Central Coast, which is at Wild by Nature at Long Beach. And, I'm hoping to grow my stockists more this year also.
Well, thank you very much for joining me today.
No, thank you, Michael.
Thank you so much for joining me today. If you like the show, don't forget to hit the follow or subscribe button. Tell a friend or two, or maybe even give the show a 5-star rating and a review. If you want more Gardeners Lodge content, you can find our website, our Instagram and our TikTok in the show notes below this episode. The Gardeners Lodge podcast is a growing media production.